course, we have, a wealth of evidence at this point that the Democrats may very well be losing on purpose. Just in the first year of the Biden administration, the Democrats have notably failed to get Build Back Better across the line. And in last year's elections, Democrats took a beating in like several states. So I guess just to start, why are the Democrats prone to losing?
Should I start or should you?
Go for it.
Well, I think what we were trying to get to in the article, and then we could go from there, is just the idea that there's this entire political economic structure of the consulting class, the Democratic Party consulting class. The people who might be listening to this or watching it might receive frantic emails from them at 3 a.m, begging them to give some money to make sure that X or Y candidate wins the election. And it seems to be that this structure is never really changed. That you can kind of fail upwards, you can move within it, you can go from campaign to campaign. And so essentially there's no incentive for this consulting class to actually produce winning candidates. And in fact, it doesn't really matter, or in some sense it actually might make it worthwhile to them for their candidate to lose, because then they are able to increasingly paint whatever Republican politician who may or may not be ghastly and ghoulish as sort of an existential threat. So what we were trying to do there was highlight the important role of this consultant class in the Democratic Party structure, and a really important part of it.
And I think the sort of, paired lesson of that is that there is really no incentive to win, whether they're losing or winning on purpose. So it creates this complete disconnect from the project of voting, which is supposed to be our say in democracy, allegedly, and any kind of results or accountability whatsoever. I wanted to read something I found on some tweet recently, because the Biden-Harris ticket left their campaign promises up.
Oops.
So fix Trump's testing. There's a little overlap with the code here. It's a little hard to read. It's jumbled, but all Americans have access to regular, reliable, and free testing. The first bullet point, double the number of drive-through testing sites. Second, invest in next generation testing, including at-home tests and instant tests. We can scale up our testing capacity. All right. You can argue that that's maybe happened in a few places. Set up a pandemic testing board like Roosevelt's War Production Board. It's how we produce tanks, planes, uniforms, and supplies in record time, and it's how we can produce and distribute tens of millions of tests. And then establish a U.S. public health jobs corps to mobilize at least 100,000 Americans across the country with support from trusted local organizations in communities at most risk. I mean, that might be part of the issue, is that there's no trusted local organizations. To perform culturally competent, little
my
fave there, approaches to contact tracing and protecting at-risk populations. Together, we can make Donald Trump a one-term president and defeat Republicans across the country. So not only do they clearly not have to do anything they say, they have no reason to win anyway. Like, it's just there's it's completely removed from any kind of like actual like tit for tat
democratic whatever, and I think this is broadly indicative of the larger power structure of American society, to bring back a term from the 1950s. Throughout the state, both places like the Department of Defense, Interior, whatever, the official state, as well as all these think tanks and NGOs, which form a type of complex to this consultant class. We have a bunch of people essentially making promises that they never fulfill, with nothing ever happening to them. And there's lots of reasons for this, and obviously capital is a very crucial one. And we just thought that this was indicative of this larger phenomenon in the American state and society.
And I think there is some evidence at this point, even with leaks, that they're just like this race is worth sacrificing. So whoever they put on the ballot was never really intended to win. Sometimes clearly, not with the person who's running knowledge. They find a patsy every once in a while.
Right. And they run these ridiculous races, but people might say they're incompetent, but if the competence is in something else and not winning elections, but keeping this structure going and making money and moving in and out of it as a campaign manager, and then going to a consultancy and sort of moving within this network, then they're actually quite competent and they're doing it quite well, and they're taking a lot of people's money
and giving their children jobs.
And this
Love
also
a
relates
It's the
sinecure.
only redistribution that exists in America right
the
now.
reproduction of meritocracy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, part of your argument also is that, ultimately it doesn't actually matter if the Dems are like actively trying to lose or if they're just so incompetent that they're losing anyway. The salient thing is that they're losers, right? And what that means is,
Right.
of course, of course, that means that they're not actually going to be able to pass any kind of policy that would make life less miserable for the majority of working people in the US. But I think another kind of aspect of just perpetual loserdom is that, and I think you say this in your article, like no one likes a loser, right? So it's like the people who aren't engaged in politics already aren't going to feel like they want to vote for Democrats.
Right.
Yeah, the party appears both feckless and sclerotic,
Mhm.
which is a difficult thing to do, but that the Democrats
Right.
are nonetheless able to do. And I think that these sorts of images do matter in popular politics, particularly if one of the things that the left needs to rely on, if it is to ever have a meaningful power in the society, is to win over non-voters. You just never want to appear weak. You never want to appear incapable of actually accomplishing anything. You never want to appear like a liar, that you're just lying to people to make money. And the Democratic Party is increasingly appearing like this. And plus that with the news coverage of the elites like Nancy Pelosi and the various stock issues relating to her, and you just have a recipe for electoral disaster.
I mean, I kind of wonder also how much of it might be conscious, because the losses, this emotional kind of roller coaster they put through, like their donor class through, where they're like, oh no, the world is ending, and then they also will send a, oh God, we failed. But
I'm so sorry, I'm on my knees.
It was a friend. That's why you need to give more and more, and it's like the loss itself is a reason to. There's no reason to stop donating. It's like, well, it's because people didn't donate enough. And then also, I kind of wonder if it has to do with like the liberal mindset of like, well, actually, everyone loves a loser. Like because that's why they think they care about the poor, is because they're, wretched and benighted, and not because they're human beings and they have a broad objection to, a society that lacks any sort of equality, but because they're like, oh, we feel bad for them. And I think they have that same mindset for themselves. They're like, if we lose a lot, maybe they'll feel bad for us.
Right.
And we can squeeze a little more money.
And that's precisely right. And that's that's so smart, Amber, because that's such a really, obviously, that's a really deep strain in liberal thought, the notion that worldly suffering is indicative of a form of high morals. So there's something in that, and that is going back to, the beginning of liberalism in the late 18th century. And this has been true for the last 200 years. So it's a really core element of what it means to be a liberal. In some sense, it's to suffer. And that has very strong connections to sort of a secularizing Protestantism, which we don't have to get into now, but it's a really core element that you see in those sorts of desperate emails, which no one likes to receive. And I can't imagine they're even that effective, but nonetheless give a presence of this class.
I think they're effective exactly to the sort of people who would donate even if they weren't so wretched in their presentation. But like normal people, I think, are really disgusted by it.
Right. It's not going to win over any adherence.
Do you guys have recent examples of like some of those pathetic emails? Because you listed some really good ones in your original article, and I only imagine that the Democrats have groveled even harder since then. But I have to admit that I unsubscribed to a lot of lists that I was on just because it was so painful to just see just that abject like moaning and groaning in the inbox. I still get Bernie's emails, of course, and his aren't like that, as we all know. But anyway, any new examples that you found?
Well, Pelosi kept it up for a while. I only recently got off of Pelosi's list, and it was also like very abject and very, begging for money, and very like 10 seconds to midnight situation in a lot of those emails. But I unsubscribed recently.
My new favorite is from this guy Maxwell Alejandro Frost, no relation.
Brother.
And he loves. There was one he sent, and the subject line was, "I've been arrested." That's just like it. And
help.
I guess he was at a protest. I saw what he was getting, and I'm like, so it was like half my family. None of them are qualified to run for office.
we've been mostly talking about politicians, but I absolutely think that, MSNBC liberals and other sort of Democratic commentators are part of this general constellation of loserdom, right? And something I've been
Right.
thinking about is, after the 2021 election in Virginia, where Democrats lost the governor's seat, uh, you guys probably remember there was just like a spate of liberal commentary where all of these, Democratic Party elites were like, the problem was white supremacy. The voters were too white supremacist, and this is why they lost. And that just seems like such a loserish explanation to me. And, I should also say that now that we've seen Latino and Asian American voters also moving away, particularly working class Latino and Asian American voters also moving away from the Democratic Party, you're starting to see those commentators repeat some of the same messages. Like I read a full-length feature article about why Latinos in Texas had shifted to Trump, which admittedly is a really interesting political phenomenon, right? But the commentators' explanation was they think they're white. And to me, it's just like,
Yeah.
why are you defaulting to this analysis, which won't help you win any elections? It's just a way to be sanctimonious and to shift the blame onto the voters. So what do you guys think about, how this class of commentators figures into the Democratic aptitude for losing?
So I actually, I'm very, in terms of the cart horse thing, I think the bourgeois press are running dogs. I don't think they really actually affect people's, certainly not as much as they think they do, affect
Agree.
people's sort of perspective or opinions on the world. I think a lot of people are sort of idiosyncratic and sort of, pull from different things that they think clarify their political conditions or the state of U.S. politics. But I still think most of it comes from their, lived experience and not in a, liberal arts school way, but just like, well, I know what happened to me. I know how much I get paid. I know what the houses cost around me. That's, I think, what forms the primary sort of basis for politics. How that gets shaped and how that gets packaged in terms of voting options, I think is sort of, up to the pundit class. I don't know what you call them, but like the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't. Okay. More Black people watch Fox News than read the New York Times statistically. They're not all voting Republican.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think people are actually more critical consumers of media than we give them credit for. So there's part of that, but also, again, the people who really consume this stuff tend to be people very invested in the party because they're the only people who have sort of benefited from it for a while. And I think the rest of America either kind of tunes them out or takes them with like a heavy dose of salt.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they do, their ability to like rationalize and the mental gymnastics of just, all these voters that voted for Obama and then didn't vote for Hillary or even voted for Trump are too racist to vote for the white woman. Like, I don't even know. I mean, there's a constant question of like, are they cynical or are they stupid? And at the end of the day, it's like Democrats winning on purpose or not. It's kind of this distinction without difference.
Yeah, and then what Amber just said almost begs the strategic question. If it doesn't appear empirically to win elections, for example, then why, like Jen, you suggested, why is this such a powerful message? And I think there's ideological and material reasons. Ideologically, addressing issues of race in the way that most mainstream liberals do kind of sidesteps issues of class, because any general addressing of an issue of racial issues will necessarily involve class, but this particular permutation sort of moves your eyes away from it. And I think that's an important reason. And then sort of around that idea, in the last 5-6 years, there's been an accretion of institutions, of NGOs, of consultants who promote a particular message that will change in 10 years into something else. It reminds me very much in my own field of foreign policy, as people went from being Soviet experts to experts on genocide to experts on Islam, and now they're experts on China. You sort of follow where the money takes you. And I think we see it's endemic to capitalism. We see that in various spheres of social and political life. And this is just the latest instantiation. And in 6 years, it'll be something else based on exogenous actual material conditions. So I think that's a big explanation of why it continues.
Right.
Yeah.
And you bring that up, but you've written about this before, and I didn't even pick up on this the first time. But it's like when Fukuyama was writing about the end of history, what he really meant was the end of my particular discipline, because what he studied was no longer going to be useful to capital. He was no longer going to be an expert that could be used as essentially a consultant or an advisor. So the end of history, the end of basically for him, the world moving forward, was he's like, oh shit, I don't have a job anymore. This is the end. This is the end of history, you guys. No one's gonna hire me.
For me, it seems like the most irritating and insidious thing about the relationship between the so-called liberal media and the Democrats is that I obviously agree that your average person isn't really taking the media that seriously, or not really watching that carefully, or is definitely not letting the media guide their political behavior. But the Democratic Party elite is watching the media. And so I feel like, what happens is that, on MSNBC, they'll be like, the voters are so white supremacist. And then the Democrats will be like, thus we must say BIPOC, And so, and then that just leads to, I guess, a vicious cycle of losing, where the Democrats keep losing. And then that just gives the media more fodder to be like, it was white supremacy. It was white supremacy.
Yeah, no, I definitely think, that's pretty much the cycle of it.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.